The year was 2301 of the imperial calendar. A 12th Everchosen of Chaos Undivided had just been anointed. As the old world braced for an invasion force numbering in the hundreds of thousands, Ulthuan's attention shifted to the Sea of Chaos. A scout in Nagarythe scurried to his commanding officer with urgent news. An entire armada of high elven ships was sinking, and a massive fleet approached from the wreckage. Black Arks and Plague fleets had banded together to attack Ulthuan. Welcome to the next video in our series on the Warhammer fantasy world, where we will cover the battles of Hathar Ford and Finuval Plain. Sometime prior to their voyage, the Witch King heard news from the Augurs of Grond that the northern Chaos Wastes were roiling with unstable magic and swelled with intensity. Despair and anger hung in the air, and visions of slaughter frequented those in Nagarythe, heralding the coming of chaos and war. However, conflict from the north meant that Malekith could not launch his planned attack on Ulthuan. As the typical raids on the northern Dark Elf towers intensified, Maharramli schemed to turn this inconvenience into an advantage. To that end, the Witch Queen gathered an enormous amount of wealth into a caravan. 1,000 Cold Ones pulled 100 wagons bursting with gold jewels. Behind her marched 10,000 slaves, and a tempting invitation was sent to the northern tribes. Any warrior who swore allegiance to the Queen of the Elves would be rewarded with riches and pleasure beyond comparison. Over the following months, Maharramli secured oaths from chiefs at every encampment her caravan stopped at. Her bewitching beauty attracted thousands of tribesmen by the day. Concubines, slaves, jewelry, and lavish riches flowed from the frozen ice palace she created. Soon, the warriors that had once wished to pillage the Dark Elves had become her pawns. They sharpened their weapons and awaited the orders of the Witch King. As his mother seduced the northern tribes, Malekith studied the history of earlier invasions into Ulthuan. In the days of the first Phoenix King, Nkari, the Keeper of Secrets, was known to have harnessed an ancient power to move troops expediently across the island. A ritual to summon the demon was prepared. As preparations continued, virgins were sacrificed in a gory, ecstatic display. As the tortured souls attracted the attention of Nkari, Malekith captured and bound the demon to his will. The Keeper was forced to take the form of a she-elf and flew into a mindless rage. However, in exchange for his servitude, the demon was promised revenge against the twins of Anarian's bloodline. Nkari seethed but bided his time. With Nkari in tow, the unified armies of Dark Elves and Chaos gathered at the shores of eastern Nagarythe. With the service of this bound demon, we shall be able to move so swiftly that our enemies will not know where we are or how to stop us before it is too late. We will be able to amass our forces to overwhelm our enemies before they know what has hit them. This, more than anything else, will give us a victory. This time all of Ulthuan will be ours. This time we will succeed. This time victory is inevitable. Witch King Malekith enacting the invasion of Ulthuan. The vessels cut across the frigid waters of the Chaos Sea and sailed for Ulthuan. They easily punched through a contesting High Elven fleet guarding Nagarythe's northern shores. Greatly outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Asor naval defense was annihilated. The invaders made landfall on Nagarythe en masse and captured the Blighted Isle. The soldiers organized, and Malekith called upon Nkari's knowledge of the paths of the Old Ones. Raiders were teleported deeper into the kingdom instantaneously, and all settlements of the kingdom were sacked with alarming efficiency. Any High Elves that managed to survive the initial onslaught were dragged to the Druki for torture and crucifixion. Nagarythe had fallen to the Witch King, who wasted no time in his moment of victory before planning his next move. To that end, he summoned General Dorian Silverblade and ordered an attack on the inner kingdoms. Avalon was the first target. Dorian's objective entailed a rush into the forested territory and the capture of the Everqueen. He waited for the cover of night to launch his surprise attack. Cainite assassins quietly slipped inside the outposts of sentries stationed along the border. At the signal, they simultaneously plunged their poisoned blades into the night watch. A wave of Druki warriors poured inside and slaughtered thousands of Asur in a single night. Deeper into the wildwood they pressed, assaulting the Everqueen's maiden guard. The Elfesses refused to allow Alarielle's capture, but ultimately they perished in the scramble and Alarielle's tent was breached. Inside, the Queen was bound and gagged by Dark Elven warriors, with the intent to drag her to the Witch King as a prized slave. The flaps of the tent swung open as a shadowy figure approached unannounced. Suddenly, the intruder dispatched the queen's captors and freed her from capture. Tyrion had come to Alarielle's rescue. Just as quickly as he arrived, he swiftly escorted her out of the tent and attempted a daring escape. But the region was swarming with invaders, and the two did not travel far before a crazed pack of witch elves gave chase. A poisoned dagger found its mark on the prince as he and the Everqueen disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Prince Arhalion of Ivres and a regiment of silver helms managed to escape the chaos. The elven nation held its breath as he delivered news of that night. Ulthuan's morale was shattered by the announcement of the Everqueen's death. Not all believed the proclamation, however. Malekith was wholly unsatisfied and unconvinced. The Witch King ordered a manhunt of enormous scale across the continent to find Alarielle dead or alive. Cold One knights eagerly answered the call for a hunt and guided 1,000 foot soldiers across all of Avalon in search of her. Knowing that failure would result in consequences far worse than the wounds he'd already received, General Dorian took command of the army once again. Their march was accompanied by 4 Cainite assassins who left no stone unturned in their search. In the southern woods of the Gaian Vale, Alarielle and Tyrion hid quietly. The Witch Elf's knife left a poison that slowly sapped the prince's health with each passing day. Soon, the Cainite assassins zoned in on their location and pounced for the kill. Even as his health faded, the prince stood to repel the attackers. Remarkably, he kept the Dark Elves at bay. However, one assassin escaped death and slinked back to the Witch King to reveal the location of the Everqueen. With a dark laugh, he unleashed the greater demon Enkari to finish the job. "You are attempting what I once did. I suspect your results will be much the same." Enkari to the Witch King Malekith. Meanwhile, the rest of Ulthuan was buckling under the pressure of a war that had erupted on multiple fronts. After the Blighted Isle and Nagarythe had been conquered, the Black Arks sailed west around the isle and formed a blockade along the coast. The floating fortresses bombarded Tiranoc, and at the same time, an army of 1 million barbarian cavalrymen barreled into Trace and Kothic. As the invasion progressed in favour of Chaos and Dark Elf, Maharramli fell into a deep slumber and received a foreboding vision. In her dream, the image of the Vortex's creator appeared. The voice of Calador Dragon Tamer echoed in her mind with one urgent warning: the Vortex must not be unravelled. Maharramli awakened in a cold sweat and abruptly departed for Nagarythe. Without her leadership, the invading horsemen splintered into smaller raiding parties. Still, they advanced to Ivres once Kothic collapsed. Tiranoc fell soon after, smouldering from the flaming ammunition of the Black Ark's siege weapons. The Asur retreated to Calador, Etain and Saphery. The Witch King was dangerously close to claiming the entire island nation. Whatever hope the High Elves clung to was rapidly vanishing. In Saphery, a single regiment of swordmasters mustered at Hathar Ford. Their unyielding courage and unwillingness to accept defeat gave Ulthuan a glimmer of much-needed hope, but the odds were greatly stacked against them. The ford was the only river crossing for miles, and an ideal bottleneck for the defending High Elves to use to their advantage. At the northern side of the river, countless Dark Elves eagerly awaited the slaughter. Commanding the Dark Elven army were Ferric Casterman and the Chaos Sorcerers of Sinch, known as the Coven of Ten. The skies darkened with foul sorcery. A horn roared across the landscape, and the Dark Elves charged the line of the Swordmasters. The High Elves bellowed out a defiant war cry and embraced the onslaught, unafraid of death. They withstood the first assault, as mightily as the cliffs of Ulthuan withstood the ocean's tide. Again and again, the Dark Elf infantry crashed against the High Elves, but they were slain with lethal grace and thrown into the rushing river. Not even volleys of arrows could best the whirling blades of the Swordmasters. They parried away all incoming fire with ease. As the battle churned out Druki bodies, the river began to change. Each wave of attack further disrupted its flow. Gore congealed and eventually blocked the waterway entirely. The strain on the river became so great that it suddenly erupted with an unrestrained wall of bloody water. It swept destruction over the northern banks and through the Dark Elves. All but the most elite warriors were killed. At that moment, Hoeth's High Lawmaster himself marched past the front line. He raised the Moonstaff of Lilith high in the air and wove a powerful spell. Teclis sent a glittering magical barrage to smite the Coven of Ten and Ferric Casterman. All contesting sorceries were negated. The Moonstaff struck them all down, and the swordmasters rallied. The warriors recited their oath and heroically countercharged for the heart of the crippled Dark Elven army. The Druchii were sent into an embarrassing rout, and the High Elves claimed a small victory among many heavy losses. From the darkness I cry for you. The tears you shed for us are the blood of the elven kind. Oisha, here I stand on the last shore, a sword in my hand. Ulthuan shall never fall. Vow of the Swordmasters of Huith. For Ulthuan there was no time for revelry. Teclis knew that Malekith was speedily closing in on the remaining High Elves. He advised the Swordmasters to march north for Finuval Plain and rendezvous with the rest of the surviving armies. But before Teclis could join them, there was one last duty he had to fulfill. In the Gaian Vale, the towering silhouette of Enkari weaved between the trees and closed in on Tyrion and Alarielle. Though the prince would have gladly stood and fought the demon, his body was far too weak from the poison. He was near death. The demon dragged his tongue across his teeth with an unholy cackle and raised a pincer over Tyrion's neck. Then a snap sounded, and a bright light flashed. Enkari's body dissolved harmlessly due to a powerful banishing spell from Teclis and his unexpected arrival. In the nick of time, he found his twin and the Everqueen just before the Arch-Tempter could drag their souls to Slaanesh. Alarielle and Teclis helped Tyrion into an inconspicuous ship near the shore and set sail across the inner sea to Saphery and to Finuval Plain. Whatever the price is, we will have to pay it, brother. If our lands are to survive, if our people are to be free, if our world is to avoid destruction. Tomorrow, for better or worse, it will be our names that are written in the pages of the history books, if there is anyone left to write them. Loremaster Teclis. Meanwhile, black arcs reached the southern points of the Crescent Isle and surrounded the last escape route. Yvresse smoked from the raiding Chaos armies, and Malekith closed in on Saphery. The final chance for a last stand had come. Defeat would doom not just Ulthuan, but the entire mortal world. As the battle lines were drawn, Malekith summoned General Dorian before him and the Black Guard. The Everqueen was alive and rallying her troops, so he had to answer for his incompetence. He was executed then and there by Malekith's champion, Urien Poisonblade, Dorian's own brother, who was thought to have been long dead. A cacophony of frenzied and gleeful cheers rose from the ranks of the Dark Elves. My friends, we are gathered here in very dark times. Our enemies are mighty and our allies few. We have suffered defeat after defeat and loss after loss. I would not blame any of you if you had lost all hope of eventual victory. Nonetheless, you have not done so. You have not given up, even in the face of a foe who delights in displaying this cruelty of power. You have not admitted defeat, even in the face of overwhelming odds. You stand before me ready to fight and die for your homeland, and that makes me proud of each and every one of you. Alarielle the Radiant before the Battle of Finuval Plain. The High Elves were heavily outnumbered. Black clouds of dark magic blotted away the sun's light, and the ground shook beneath the marching of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The two sides halted just shy of marching within range of each other's missile fire at the presence of a flag of truce. Concern and curiosity spread between the High Elven ranks. The flag was carried by a Dark Elven emissary. He challenged a champion of Alarielle's choosing to a duel with the Witch King's chosen champion. As the challenge was proposed, a warrior clad in the regalia of Yvresse named Arhalion accepted and received the Everqueen's blessing. He met Urien Poisonblade in the heart of the plain and crossed blades with the Witch King's favour. His duel was short. Even quicker was his death. Another wild and crazed cheer erupted from the Dark Elven ranks. But the Azur still clung to hope. Another warrior stepped forward to shoulder the weighty challenge. Korhain Ironglaive proudly approached Urien as the champion of the White Lions and brandished his war axe for another duel. But even the captain was struck down in an alarmingly short amount of time. There were whispers of despair and doubt amongst the High Elves. A third challenger dared to avenge the two fallen warriors. Tyrion had recovered from the poison and arrived on horseback, wearing the armor of Anarion. It was a gift from his father for rescuing the Everqueen. He was carried by Malhandir, a descendant of the Father of Horses, and a gift from the Kingdom of Illyrian. The prince kept the heart of Avalon close as he heard Korhain's last dying wish: Urien must be killed. A wicked grin spread across Urien's face as he gladly accepted such a valuable opponent. He was confident that the outcome would be much the same. With bated breath, both armies looked on in anticipation as Tyrion survived the first few seconds. Seconds turned into minutes, and before long, an entire hour had passed since the two champions crossed blades. Malekith's rage boiled over as he witnessed his favoured warrior perish to the blade of the High Elf wearing his own father's armour. The Witch King barked out the order to charge, and Tyrion raised a triumphant blade to spur the Asur to contest it. The front lines clashed together, and the mountains echoed from their thunderous engagement. Ulthuan knights organised at the flanks and rushed into the back line of missile infantry. Witch Elves folded through the front line and slipped past any gaps to thin out lesser Asur warriors. In their wake, Cainite assassins quietly trailed behind them and leapt upon High Elven mages and princes. At the far right flank, Chaos warriors pinned down the swordmasters of Huath. Monstrous Chaos slaughterbrutes and Chimera leaped over the spearmen and descended upon the White Lions. Pressure of the initial skirmish dealt considerable losses to the High Elves. As the Ulthuan knights tore into a second regiment of archers, Shadow warriors sprang a surprise trap and crippled their reptilian mounts. The Witch Elves screamed in agony from the sweeping flames of a flamespire phoenix that dove down and across their advance. Bodies from all factions quickly littered the battlefield. So numerous were the dead and dying that warriors had to fight over mounds of corpses. Teclis and Malekith engaged in a magical duel, while Tyrion remained at the forefront of the fray. Lightning shattered the sky from the Lawmaster's staff and slowly chipped away at the Black Guard attending the Witch King. A dark cloud of poison billowed above Malekith and crept over both Dark Elf and High Elf spearmen. It killed indiscriminately, for he did not care who succumbed to the spell. The cloud swirled in the direction of Teclis, but suddenly changed course. It floated backwards across the Dark Elven infantry again, after the Lawmaster weaved a counterwind spell. A path of carnage was left in a direct line for the Witch King. Teclis bravely chased the opening to attempt a decisive blow to Malekith, but the Witch King erupted with shadowy magic and summoned an endless stream of demons from the Chaos Realm. The High Elves quickly became overwhelmed by the surge in reinforcements. Alarielle raised the Stave of Avalon high. A bright light burned in her eyes as she called upon the power of the land and all of the magical gifts within her. An explosion erupted, and a shockwave of pure light rippled along the entire battlefield. The thousands of summoned demons were banished in a blink of an eye. She collapsed to the ground and was taken to safety by her small number of handmaidens. Teclis once more had his chance. He recited a powerful incantation, and every word cast a bright flame over Malekith. The flames of Assyrian that had mutilated and burned him so long ago were reignited. The pain was so great that Malekith threw himself into the realms of chaos and disappeared from the battlefield. In the eyes of his army, it looked as if their king had been defeated. Disorder and confusion compromised the Druki army. Teclis did not waste a moment to keep the pressure on Ulthuan's invaders. All throughout the wavering ranks, plumes of magical flame erupted from the earth. Bolts of magic fell like stars from the skies and bombarded the Dark Elven back line. Tyrion burst from the shimmering mists of magic like a phantom and rode Malhandir straight for the Witch King's standard-bearer. His flaming sword came down in a wide arc and hacked down the Dark Elf. The banner fell atop the bloody mud. It shattered the invaders' already shaky morale. Malekith's army scattered for the north, and a great victory had been claimed for the High Elves. Though our fair homeland is beset on all sides, we shall resist, as our fathers did before us. In these dark times, as our tainted brethren ravage our shores, we stand defiant and shall emerge victorious. For we are the Asur, the true kin of Anarion, and Ulthuan shall never fall. Prince Tyrion, defender of Ulthuan. Following their crushing victory, the tide of war shifted entirely in the High Elves' favour. Nagarythe was nowhere to be found, and the Witch King had apparently perished in battle. There was no leadership to push the final phase of the invasion. Tyrion led the army at Finuval Plain south to Attain to help relieve Lothern as it sustained a lengthy siege from Black Arcs. Phoenix King Finubar rallies the warriors within the walls to set them out for an attack, while the remaining invaders in the south were annihilated. 2 short days later, the Asur were on the offensive. Finubar commanded half of the Elven forces on a march north through Saphery to assault the Dark Elf host. He chased them past Avalon and out of the Inner Kingdoms, while Tyrion reinforced the Tower of Huath. Once the Inner Kingdoms were secured and the gates were operational, the Dark Elves were driven from the Outer Kingdoms. Ulthuan had been saved without a second to spare, but the Everchosen's march still threatened the old world. The realms of man must not fall. Our fate is intertwined with theirs, and if they fall, so too do we. For this reason I taught their first masters of magic, and for this reason we must not abandon men despite their barbarous ways. Teclis, Loremaster of Ulthuan. A weathered ship docked in Lothern. It carried a messenger from the old world, who brought news of Chaos's successful attack on Kislev. The nation had been overrun, and now Chaos threatened to descend upon the Empire. Magnus the Pious sought the aid of the Elves, lest Chaos destroy humanity and pledge aid to the Dark Elves again. The Elves could spare very few warriors after so many losses, but Teclis agreed to lend a hand to mankind. The war for Ulthuan may have concluded, but the war for the world had only just begun. More videos on the Warhammer Fantasy world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.